Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Greetings, super friends. Welcome to today's show. My guest today is one of the most notable and respected names in the CrossFit world, and an accomplished Olympic weightlifting specialist. If you've ever visited a CrossFit gym almost anywhere in the world and seen a chart on the wall demonstrating the ideal Olympic lifting movements and positions, you've probably already seen her. She's been in the fitness industry all of her professional life and has trained and worked early on with the great Kelly Starrett at SF CrossFit, long before either of them were what they are today. More recently, she's competed nationally as an Olympic lifter and is the head coach at FuBarbell. On another note, she's just a crazy strong lady who breaks barriers and personal records like it's her business. And actually, it kind of is. For those who are interested in optimizing their health or getting more out of their workouts, this interview will offer a lot of value. It's also a really lively conversation and has tons of entertainment value. By the way, this episode's brought to you by Audible.com, the world's largest source of audiobooks. Do us a favor and enjoy a free 1-month trial and download one of their 180,000 plus titles at audibletrial.com/superhuman. And now, let me introduce you to Miss Diane Fu. Hey, Diane, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you today.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me on today.
So I have to admit, I was at the CrossFit gym today here in Tel Aviv, and I went up to both of the trainers who were kind of standing around, and I was like, guys, you're not going to believe who I'm interviewing today. And they go, who? And I point to the poster behind them on the wall. I'm like, her. They're like, wow, that's amazing. So I'm really excited to get to pick your brain.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm really stoked to be here as well. And it's great that they have that poster on the background.
So tell me the truth. Like, are people ordering that poster from all over the world, or did someone probably bring it to my gym from home, I guess?
Well, let me start by asking you. Home is, give me your orientation again.
So I'm originally from the States, but the gym is here in Tel Aviv, Israel. So in my mind, you're kind of like in every CrossFit gym in the world. Would you say that's true?
You know what? To some aspect, I probably am. And to be quite frank, I probably should be, because the poster, you're talking about the FuBarbell with Push Press collaboration poster, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that poster is, I work with this company called Push Press, and they're basically like, they're an operating platform for coaches like myself that travel and do seminars. They're also a great platform in terms of just, operating day-to-day or managing gym membership base, retail, et cetera, et cetera. So I've been working with them for a number of years now. And what we decided to do was we decided to put together this, modern day, aesthetically pleasing poster about weightlifting movement. And largely it's because we have such an influx of people coming into our gyms on a daily basis. And they're like, I can't recall the number of times I would teach a Saturday class and people would come in and I'd be like, okay, guys, this is what we're doing today. We're going to do some thrusters. We're going to do some burpees. We're going to do some box jumps. And people would be like, what's a thruster? Right? And it's like week after week after week. So you can imagine when it comes down to the Olympic lifts, how much more challenging it is to remember the different phases, the different parts, key names, like what's the difference between a power clean and a hang clean or a hang power clean. So we created this poster together to give out as a free reference for people, where they can essentially, I think we put the poster for quote sale, but sale was really just to cover the shipping costs to get a poster to you. Or we provided it as a free link for people where they can just download it, take it to their closest Office Depot or whatnot, or Kinko's, and get one printed out for themselves.
That's amazing. And so now you're smiling over CrossFitters in probably 100-something countries.
Everywhere. So that's why, to be frank, I'm like, I should be in every gym.
That is super cool. Actually, that's not how I discovered you. I discovered you because one of the first books that I read when I became a speed reader, or what we call a super learner, I think the first book I read was on body language, and the second was a novel, and the third I read was actually Kelly Starrett's book, Becoming a Simple Leopard. And immediately I was like, who is this badass chick who's like performing all the movements? Because when you read a lot of weightlifting materials, it's not often that you see a woman modeling the movements. I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, it happens to be a lot of the boys. And, I think Kelly being such a big driver of position and good movement and being able to apply his framework across everyone, it was really important for him to use someone like me who is able to exhibit full range of motion or express potential full range of motion to people.
How did you get to that point? Obviously, Kelly being, one of the respected names in CrossFit, you also being one of the most respected names in CrossFit. How did you get there?
Well, the story actually goes way back, and it comes from really modest roots. I've been involved in, let's call it the greater global fitness community for, God, you know what, Jonathan? I'm not good at high-level math. Give me what 1999 till now is.
Yeah, okay, about 16 years.
Okay, so I've been in the greater fitness community for about 16 years. I don't have my roots in California, although, I can say I was born in California, but I actually grew up in the Midwest, Illinois to be specific. And so after high school, I had a yearning to go adventure out and not be in the Midwest anymore. And so I found myself plopped down in San Francisco, California. And I ended up falling in love with the area, the people, the culture, the diversity, everything that San Francisco has to offer. And I ended up staying. In staying, I decided to attend school here, wasn't really sure what I was going to do. And I always had an interest in weight training, even since I was a young girl in high school. And that led me into my first commercial gym where I was like, hey, look, I'm a young college student. I'm broke. I need a job. It'd be nice if I got a free membership along with that. So I found myself working at a commercial fitness club in 99. And that slowly moved into personal training because I realized they were doing something really special and I wanted to be involved at a higher level. And so personal training became personal training management. I ended up going through school while I was a trainer. After I finished school, I essentially stayed in the commercial track and I started managing health clubs. And so it was during this time in my fitness management track that I had the opportunity to grand open a health club for my company in South San Francisco. I came across this young man during one of my interviews. And if I throw the name out there, if you're in the know, he's a little bit behind the scenes these days. But if you're in the know, you'll recognize this name right off the bat. His name is Adrian Bosman. And so are you familiar with Adrian?
I have to admit I'm not.
That's okay. He operates a lot behind the scenes now. His official title, I believe, is he's the head judge for CrossFit HQ. So do you watch the Open every year?
Every year, no. I watched it last year. I've only been a CrossFitter for about a year and a half, I have to admit. But I did watch it last year.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so Adrian happens to be one of the judges for the athletes that compete every Open. And so as a head judge, he's also responsible for every single judge at all the CrossFit sanctioned events. We're talking like the Open, we're talking regionals, we're talking the games, how they have like hundreds of judges everywhere. He orchestrates them all. So back then, Adrian was, like me, just a trainer in the fitness industry, and he was the one that actually got me into CrossFit. I saw him doing something in the corner of our gym one day that looked different, and it looked a little spastic, to be quite honest, because in the commercial gyms, we don't move like that, right? We do flexi tube and BOSU training. We're very boxed into a certain way of moving our people.
Right.
And so when Adrian's doing something kind of spastic looking in the corner, it piqued my interest. And it turned out he was, I think, running some iteration of Fran. And so that got me interested because I'm like, what is this seizure you're having on our pull-up bar? And he's like, well, I'm like, I want to give it a try. So he's like, cool, this is called a kipping pull-up. And so I'm like, you're just cheating your pull-up. And so I jump up there and of course I try to have a little seizure and kip my pull-up and it did not work and it floored me, right? So after Adrian put my paces through a workout, I was on the floor, I was sweating, I was nauseous, I was a little lightheaded and I coughed a little bit and I'm like, is that blood in my throat? And immediately I realized there was something really special. And so
that's when you were coughing up blood, that's when you knew.
Awesome. So immediately I realized there was something really special and I wanted to become involved. I wanted to know more. And Adrian, being the inquisitive person that he is, he actually went out and sought more information. He started going down to Santa Cruz, hanging out with Coach Glassman, Dave Castro, Nicole Carroll, all those cats back then that were just kind of getting things started themselves. And this is where he met Kelly Starrett.
Mm-hmm.
And Kelly at that time, he was like all of us, just beginning. He was in school for physical therapy. He was just trying to find a mode of fitness for himself, nothing more. I want to exercise. I want to maintain health. I want to, do something different. And that path led him to CrossFit in Santa Cruz. And Adrian and Kelly ended up becoming good friends. They connected. Kelly decided to start a San Francisco CrossFit inside San Francisco and invited Adrian to come up and help him coach. The community started growing at a modest rate and ended up getting to a point where the need for more professional coaches came about. And because I had maintained my connections with that community, I went up, I attended their classes. Adrian was still working for and with me at that time. At the point that CrossFit community needed more leadership, Kelly reached out his hand and was like, hey, Diane, if you're ever interested, we would love for you to come coach with us. And it didn't even take me a second before I was like, yes, absolutely, I'm coming up.
Amazing.
That's how we got started.
Amazing. So CrossFit has become so ubiquitous and it's just taken the world by storm. We almost take it for granted that everyone's going to know what it's about. But for those who this is maybe the first time they're hearing about it or have some misconceptions that it's all about coughing up blood, I'd like to hear a little bit about, coming from the traditional fitness background, comparing it to CrossFit, and maybe pointing out some of the ways in which you felt it was an improvement over the kind of Globo Gym fixed axis workouts that you were involved with before.
Well, here's the deal is CrossFit, I really feel, changed the face of fitness. And CrossFit is really special. There's CrossFit and then there's what appeals. And what appeals to the masses is like seeing very fit people working out to their limits, being intense, big weights, loud music, being flashy. And so that's oftentimes what people capture with the greater net of CrossFit. But if you start to peel back the layers and, really look at what CrossFit is about at its roots, it's about functional movement performed at high intensity. And high intensity, let me first put it out there, that's relative to the individual. So high intensity for you and high intensity for me are separate cases, but we're working hard, right?
Right.
Functional movement performed at high intensity, and we're looking at movements that take the body through a very large range of motion. And so if we look at that as one of the definitions of CrossFit, CrossFit becomes very broad. And it could be, in my opinion, these days, as the sport evolves, it starts to look very different for different populations, but its roots are all essentially the same. We have right now, I think we're working with an adaptive athlete crew where we have athletes that come in with different limitations, whether it's CP, whether they, lost their quadriplegic, paraplegic. We have athletes coming in with all different backgrounds, and we're starting to adapt CrossFit to their needs. And does it overall still look like CrossFit? Absolutely. But it's scaled to their ability. And that's what's really special to me about CrossFit is it's scalable to each individual person that comes to the door.
Absolutely. We have t-shirts from all over the world in our box, different CrossFit boxes. And one of my favorite ones is from London, where it says, tough enough for a Marine, scalable for the Queen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Think it's wonderful. And I've certainly had my ass kicked by a 60-year-old woman, CrossFit Cape Town. She completely destroyed me in the WOD. So it's really scalable, and it's certainly not only for young, hardcore people.
No, absolutely not. My youngest athlete, I'm really proud to say, and, I work largely these days within the weightlifting sector of fitness, weightlifting sector of CrossFit, and actually weightlifting sector of weightlifting. Mm-hmm. But I also still hold a space for CrossFit or / fitness athletes. And so my youngest athlete started when he was 7 years old. And I'm very proud to say my oldest athlete started when she was 78 years old.
Incredible.
And so being able to take this platform and kind of lay it over this spectrum of age range is really, it's neat for me as a coach because I get to play with all these tools.
Right. Absolutely. So I do want to get into the weightlifting thing, but I want to ask you one a little bit controversial question, which is, and I'm sure it's hard to answer.
Let's do this.
Yeah. Is CrossFit the best all-around fitness regimen out there in your mind? Or if not, what is?
Is CrossFit the best fitness regimen in my mind? I believe it is, absolutely. Because CrossFit, if we look at the definition, I mean, there are movements that they teach in the level 1 that are associated directly with CrossFit. But if I just take CrossFit as how they define it with their different models, to me, CrossFit can be a lot of different things. And so CrossFit doesn't mean that you need a barbell. CrossFit could essentially be bodyweight movement. And do I think bodyweight movement is important for all individuals? Absolutely. If you don't know how to move your own body weight around, if you don't have the awareness to move your own body weight around, then CrossFit for you is going to look very different. But I can absolutely still call that CrossFit. Mm-hmm. Now, if we're talking about different modes of training, like, for example, at San Francisco CrossFit, we also offer a yoga class. What's great is we have some coaches that actually came from teaching a dance/Pilates background. So you'll see elements of that inside our athletes' recovery work, inside our athletes maybe warm up, inside our athletes warm down. And we still call that and consider that CrossFit.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a philosophy. What I love about it is everyone's encouraged to go out and do varied movement of all sorts. I mean, I have one trainer who's an Olympic lifter, one trainer who's a power lifter, one trainer who's a cyclist, and they come from all over the place, and it's all about movement, really.
Yeah, it's a movement-driven philosophy. It's a movement-driven practice. And when we're talking about movement is universal, right? Mm-hmm. So I absolutely believe it is the best mode of fitness.
Yeah, awesome. I'm glad to hear. I spend so much time there. I'm glad to hear I'm doing something well.
You're doing it perfect, Jonathan.
So if it is this kind of perfect movement philosophy and fitness philosophy, what has kind of caused you to move more into the Ollie lifting side of it? What about Ollie lifting is so appealing?
Well, I'm going to put it out there. I'm kind of a selfish person. And so I'm a little selfish. I'll be the first to say. So when it comes to CrossFit, I love CrossFit. You know, I love the community. One of the things that I'm really proud about when I travel around and teach my seminars is I go, hey, look, there's something special about what we do. And one thing that I'm really proud about being and operating within the CrossFit community is that it doesn't matter if I've been to your country or not. It doesn't matter if I've been to your state or not, or city, or know the language. As long as I step my foot inside a CrossFit door, I immediately feel like I'm right back at home, right? And that's a very powerful thing to say, because I don't think I can say that just going to a commercial gym. And there are certainly commercial gyms that have chains around the world. And, you know, I would not stretch myself and go like, hey, if I walk into this chain and I walk into a chain in whatever country, that it's going to feel the same to me.
Right.
But in CrossFit, it does. It does.
There's a certain familiar and familial aspect to where people are very friendly. People are always asking. I mean, today I worked out with someone from Ecuador, and everyone kind of crowds around him. Where are you from? Oh, that's amazing. You know, what are your favorite lifts? All that cool stuff.
Yeah, they want to know your story. They want to know your background. They want to know what you know. They want to share what they know. And it's a very open source, very open-minded community that we operate within. So how could I be like, hey, I want to leave this behind? If that was my option where I had to choose, that probably would have been a very difficult choice. In fact, that probably wouldn't have been a choice back then if it was like you had to choose one over the other, right? But because I continue to coach at San Francisco CrossFit, because I continue to coach CrossFit and fitness in general, and I knew I didn't have to leave that behind. As a young coach, when I first started in CrossFit, right? We're not talking about fitness. Fitness, I've been around the block a few times. But when we started CrossFit, the playing field was even. I had discovered all these different avenues that it's never even propagated in my consciousness before, right? What is powerlifting? What is Olympic style weightlifting? What gymnastics? Don't I just watch gymnastics every 4 years in the Olympics? Aren't they meant for 12-year-old girls that are, super flexible, right? And what is rowing? I've never rowed before. Okay, running. Okay, now there's run technique. What does that mean, right? Don't you just put one foot in front of the other and start moving your body weight around?
Yeah.
So there's all these different avenues as a young coach that I'm like, okay, stimulation overload. How do I coach? How do I become good at all these different areas? And so when I first started coaching CrossFit, that was the problem I was trying to solve. I was trying to solve how to become a better mover, how to become more knowledge, how to become a better coach. And so I did what was natural for all coaches that are inquisitive. I went out and I sought out experts in each of these fields. Right. And so I wanted to learn more about powerlifting. So I went out, and back then our SME for CrossFit was Mark Ripito. So, hung out with Mark Ripito a little bit, try to gather more information and all these different coaches in all these different sectors.
At this point, I just want to take a quick moment to tell our listeners about this episode's sponsor, Audible. Audible is the world's largest source of audiobooks with over 180,000 titles that you can listen to on just about every device, from your iPhone or Android all the way to your old school MP3 player or tablet. You can help support this show and make sure we keep bringing you great interviews like this one by heading over to audibletrial.com/superhuman and signing up for a free 1-month trial. It costs you nothing. You can get a free copy of one of the books we've mentioned in this episode, and it really makes a big difference in helping us cover the expenses of producing this show. All right, back to the episode. Let me ask you this. Is Ollie lifting something that everyone can benefit from?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And of course, I say that with caution, because do I feel like if you're an athlete that's very limited in range of motion, maybe you've had some injury, right? Are there elements of Olympic lifting that you can benefit from? Yes, for sure. Do I feel like you need to Olympic lift to receive the benefits of health and fitness? No, absolutely not. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's a two-sided coin. Yes, you can benefit because Olympic lifting for me isn't ground to full squat overhead. I can dissect it down. I can reduce the load, right? First of all, so you're just training motion. I can reduce the speed, and now you're doing overhead squats, partial range deadlifts, full deadlifts, right? You're doing presses with the barbell, which is still a component of Olympic weightlifting, right? I can even alter the range of motion, right? We have the pull from the start to the finish, which is a very technical lift if you look at the entire duration of the pull. But what if we took the pull down and made it shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter? And now you're just training one component, right? And I can also alter positioning, which is, one of the things I speak about in my seminars when it comes to coaching what I call the late adopter or the modern day athlete, is a lot of it is creative problem solving. How do I adjust position when my athlete doesn't have full range of motion yet so that they can be able to access this movement? Right? Those are the things that we take a look at.
And that comes back to the scalability aspect as well.
Oh, yeah. That's what I'm talking about is, can everybody benefit? 150% of my being, yes. Does everybody need it to benefit? No. It still boils down to choice for the person.
Right. You've talked a lot about, learning the kipping pull-up and, hey, I've never done rowing and stuff like that. And I think one of the things, Diane, that really appeals to me about CrossFit is I feel that every time, especially someone who's interested in accelerated learning, and that's kind of my area of focus, every time I learn a skill, whether it's, double unders with the jump rope or it's cleans or hang cleans, there's always another skill thrown at me. And so I'm constantly not only improving my physical fitness, but I'm learning so much. And as soon as you get the kipping pull-up, well, all right, time to learn butterfly pull-ups. As soon as you have the double unders, well, all right, time to learn the triple unders.
Yep.
In a sense, it's never enough, but it keeps you very mentally stimulated as opposed to going to your Globo gym and doing the same 6 movements week after week.
Well, this circles back to your question on the popularity of CrossFit. And this is why I feel CrossFit is the best mode of fitness, because it's not just physical stimulation, it's mental stimulation as well. And that keeps intelligent people engaged. Right? Intelligent people that have ADD engaged, right? People that want to not be bored at the gym. Oh my God, going to the gym and doing a set of, 15 bicep curls for, 3 sets might be interesting for some people, but for other people, that sounds like torture.
Right.
Right? That sounds like nothing they'd want to spend their time doing. But going to the gym and learning a new body weight skill, who doesn't want to feel more coordinated within their own bodies?
Absolutely.
Right? And so, of course, immediately that's appealing. And then we have to be able to keep these intelligent individuals stimulated and constantly learning. So, of course, once you get coordinated with a single under, we're going to throw a double under at you, right? And this is how CrossFit as a community scales up. If you look at our very first CrossFit Games held at Aromas, it looks a little different than what we're doing these days at the games. The events are more challenging, they're more skill-based, they've become increasingly more varied. And so as a community, as our individual pieces, our athletes evolve, so does the sport itself.
Indeed. One aspect we haven't covered, Diane, is mobility. And I think we should, because you work with the authority in mobility at the epicenter for mobility, which is SF CrossFit.
That's great that you say that, because I say I come from the mobility epicenter of the galaxy.
It's so true. I'm pretty sure that someone over there coined the term mobility as opposed to just saying flexibility, range of motion, all that good stuff. Talk to me about mobility. Where does that fit in for your average person? I know I should be doing it, but maybe some other people do not. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Like, where does mobility fit in? Is it a daily thing? Is it an every other day thing?
Oh, where doesn't mobility fit in? Mobility is life. Mobility is, I should tell Kelly that mobility is life.
That's a great quote.
Mobility is life. If you're not moving, you're probably dead. Right?
Right.
Movement is, in essence, it's human function, and that's where mobility falls in. The reason why we call it mobility and we don't just call it range of motion, because we don't call it just flexibility. Mobility is essentially motor control, motor function and integration of all the different systems of our body. Mm-hmm. And so where wouldn't mobility fall in? If I have an athlete that sits at their office or at their desk from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then also has to drive anywhere from half an hour to an hour, which is not unforeseeable in California, mm-hmm. then they're sitting for anywhere from 8 to 10, 12 hours a day. They're going to be a little tight through their hips, which is going to have direct impact on their spine, which is going to have direct impact on their nervous system function, and their quality of life starts to do this downward spiral over time. And so if you do sit at a desk all day, then you should absolutely be doing some form of mobility. And this is where, Kelly comes in, and he has his book Desk Bound, where he creates strategies for people that are sitting on a daily basis, how to maintain, range of motion, how to maintain, full functionality of their bodies.
Oh,
is mobility something that people need on a daily basis? Yeah, to some level, sure. Especially if you can take a look at what it is, what tasks do you perform on a daily basis that's repetitive? Chances are there's going to be some compensatory movement in there that's going to shorten your range a little bit somewhere. And so if you can continue to be aware and manage that and stay on top of it, your body is going to last you a much longer duration.
Right. I didn't realize that Kelly has a new book, actually. I would love to read it, because Supple Leopard was admittedly very high level, very technical, and geared more towards trainers, I think.
Well, in that case, here's my plug for Kelly. He's got several books out. He's got one called Desk Bound, and he's got, another one called Born to Run, where he mm-hmm. addresses mobility from, through the lens of both running and sitting, right? Kind of opposite ends of seemingly the same spectrum. So he's got, and he's going to continue to create resources for people to help them solve their problems.
Amazing. A lot of his stuff completely changed my game. And he's really super good, coming back to kind of accelerated learning. He's really super good at deconstructing movements to their most essential elements, kind of that 20% that yields 80% of the benefits. So for years, I couldn't do squats, or I thought I couldn't do squats. I had severe knee pain. And it turns out that there were 2 or 3 minor adjustments out of the 100 things that he says about squats. I think he writes for 50 pages on squats. But there are 2 or 3 minor adjustments that are emphasized in such a way that completely changed my squat. And I really love how Kelly says, the squat is the single most important movement that a human being can partake in, because I think that's absolutely true. There's nothing that's not working when you're squatting.
Yeah. Well, so, what's really interesting that you said that. I'd like to actually learn a little bit more. You've mentioned accelerated learning. And I think right before we jumped on the podcast, you were mentioning that you studied intensively in speed reading.
Yeah.
Would you consider that an art, a skill?
I consider it a super skill. And I am really interested in super skills as a whole, which is kind of how I ended up hosting this podcast. But, how can I sleep in chunks of 4.5 hours and feel better than if I slept 8? Or how can I read faster and remember more? And yeah, Kelly's book was one of the first books that I really devoured when I developed this skill. And I took away a ton of really, really impactful stuff. So for example, on the squat, coming back, like 2 or 3 simple factors, right? He talks about twisting the plates. So many people, when they squat, they jut their knees forward. I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but they jut their knees forward, which creates a lot of pressure on the knees. knees go over the toes, and then that just screws the whole mechanics of the squat up. And the simple fix for that, as you guys teach, is spinning the plates, right? External rotation in the legs, which tightens the glutes, which closes the gaps in the hip joints. And it's like a very simple mechanical fix that will instantly improve anyone's squat. It's super simple stuff, right?
It's really simple because Kelly's viewpoint is human performance. And if we're talking about the roots of human performance, we're talking about learning how to mechanically stabilize your system, because we are core to extremity stabilizers, right? We start from the spine. Spine is your chassis in which everything else hangs off of. So if your spine is disorganized, you're going to have a very hard task or a hard time stabilizing all the surrounding systems and structures. Now, being able to remain stable through your trunk, or knowing how to maintain center and maintain midline stability, then allows you to execute proper kinematic sequencing, which when we're talking about movement then goes from extremity back to core, or I should say which piece is actually anchored to a ground, whether you're going to be throwing or pitching a baseball, or whether you're going to be doing a pull-up to toes to bar. But everything starts with stability first.
Mm-hmm. I never knew until I read Kelly's book. It's really funny because he talks about the body really doesn't come with a user's manual. And a lot of people today, we had a guest on our show, Erwin LaCour, who's all about natural movement as well. And he had this great quote, which is, most people today don't even know how to use their bodies, and they're not even embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's true, not to rip on anyone who sits at a desk all day, but I never knew that my abs are supposed to be about 20 to 30% tensed all the time, just to keep my spine straight.
Yeah.
And I thought that if I was standing with my abs somewhat clenched, like, what's the point? You're sucking it in. But in fact, just that simple adjustment has improved my posture.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's little things like that make such a huge, huge difference.
I challenge people on a daily basis. Nothing makes my midline feel, my posture, let's say, midline doesn't mean much to people. Posture means more. Mm-hmm. So nothing makes me feel more connected or taller in my posture than doing some basic planking and bridging on a daily basis.
Yeah.
It just cues the trunk to turn on, and suddenly I feel a little bit taller. I feel like I can hold myself better. And if we're talking about a little bit of, pre-activation prior to training, that'll just remind you to stay on when you're performing all your different activities.
Right. And it has to do with kind of the nerves firing and activating those muscles and waking them up, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me ask this. You mentioned kind of your posture. You are an authority, as we've said, in Olympic lifting, but you certainly don't look like She-Hulk. So I'd like to ask you, what do you say to women who worry about weightlifting, or the kind of token quote, well, I don't want to get bigger. I don't want to look like a man. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if we're boiled down to semantics, there's weightlifting, one word, and there's weightlifting, two words, right? So weightlifting, one word, universally means what they consider the snatch and clean and jerk. Now, if we're just talking about weightlifting, two words, then now we're looking at the entire realm of picking up a form of weight, whether it's a dumbbell, barbell, kettlebell, whatnot, and manipulating it around your base of support, right? So, if we're looking at weightlifting, like snatch, clean, and jerk, because of the nature of the movements, because it's explosive, because it's at speed, because we are lifting weights that are, quote, at the limits of our performance, but not necessarily at the limits of our absolute strength, it doesn't really quite build the thick, chunky muscles that some women might be associating in their minds. Mm-hmm. It makes you actually more athletic. It makes you more agile. It forms self-awareness, right? It forms also spatial awareness. And so all these qualities have really nothing to do with the size of your muscles. It's more neurological in nature. And so this is why, especially in the United States, women have actually taken a huge interest in Olympic-style weightlifting over even the male counterparts. And I have a theory, because it is more neurological in nature, it allows them to express good movement. It allows them to feel powerful, to feel strong, mm-hmm. without putting all the quote-unquote extra bulk that they might associate with training at heavy intensities or weights.
Right. I read a really incredible article recently that kind of made the claim that stigmatizing women against lifting weights is, in a sense, a pretty ugly form of sexism, because it's taking away this fluidness with their bodies and this comfort and this feeling of actualization that you can do it, you can improve. And it's, in a sense, a way of kind of putting women down. I thought that was really insightful as well.
Yeah. And, this is the power of weightlifting and also CrossFit is it's empowered women to embrace their athletic side. I mean, muscles are sexy in our world.
Strong is the new skinny.
Yeah, strong is the new skinny. Muscles are sexy. Women embrace feeling strong. Women embrace being very athletic, and they're not afraid to demonstrate it.
Absolutely. And the other thing I always like to tell women is, if only it were that easy to bulk up and put on an extra 2 inches of muscle around your legs.
You said it, my friend. Absolutely.
I eat 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day and I can't manage it. So if any woman out there has a story where she has been able to put on 20 pounds of muscle, please do let me know how it happens.
I've been known to not be afraid of whatever I need to do to hit my goals. And so when I first started in weightlifting, I went the classic track of, I was still coaching CrossFit, but I allowed myself to be the athlete. And I found myself with my first coach, Jim Schmitz, down at the Sports Palace, and I played the athlete for a while. In my mind, I didn't know what my limit was. I didn't know what my potential was. In my mind, I could have made it to the Olympics, which now I know is never going to happen, or even come close. But I had to let myself chase that dream, right? I had to be the athlete. I had to let myself live that dream, because that's my experience that I then get to share, moving forward into the future. And, going through that athlete track, I came in very small, small girl. I wasn't very strong, not terribly muscular. And so I was not afraid to do what I considered the seafood diet, right? Mm-hmm. Not seafood, but literally I see something and I put it in my mouth.
Right.
To try and bulk and gain weight. And it worked. It wasn't very clean weight, but it definitely bumped me up like a weight class or so. And let me tell you, it is extremely hard to put on muscle, because as soon as I stopped competing, all of that bulk just fell right off. Any weight that I had put on just started to kind of backslide and backtrack. And so just putting it out there to the boys and girls that are afraid to get a little stronger, it is incredibly hard. It really is incredibly hard.
And it also goes to show, there's a big difference between being someone who has a high level of testosterone and not, because there are people who will slap on muscle much easier and people who simply won't. And that has a lot to do with your endocrine system and stuff like that. So. Oh,
absolutely. It has everything to do with your chemistry, your makeup. It has also a lot to do with your levers, right? How long or not long your bones are in relation to each other.
Oh, interesting.
Well, if you think about it, if you're a little bit of a, shorter femored person, you're probably going to put on quad size a lot easier. You're probably going to put on hamstring size a lot easier. And size is something that I like to think of as a compound. It's like a very good mutual fund. It starts to compound once it starts to grow some foundation. And it's like once you start to gain some size, the fibers actually end up becoming a little bit more responsive to even more hypertrophy. And so what might start very difficult for someone in the beginning actually becomes easier once they get the momentum going.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that your diet was kind of very dirty bulk for a while. I'm curious what your diet is now, actually.
I've played around. So once I stopped competing, I let myself not do dirty bulk because it actually doesn't feel good to be that inflamed all the time.
Yep.
And I didn't, really know any better back then. I was reading a blog called 70s Big, where the motto was, every pizza can be a personal pizza as long as you believe or try hard enough. Right? So that was my motto for a little while there.
Dirty bulk.
I know. And, it worked. I look at some of my photos back then and I definitely won the bulking game. And so these days, once I got off, then it went to, I did Zone for a while, which is the classic CrossFit model for nutrition.
Which one is that?
Zone.
What does it look like?
Zone is by a gentleman named Dr. Barry Sears. And Zone is essentially a 40-30-30 model where 40% of your caloric intake is through carbohydrates, 30% of it is through protein, and 30% of it is through fat.
Wow.
And what they want to do is they want each meal to be tailored in that fashion. And to try and simplify it for athletes is they turn it and they reduce it down into blocks. So they go, one almond is worth, one block of fat and one block of protein, right? And then you basically assemble these blocks like little Legos in every meal. And it should equate out to that 30 percentage.
That's super interesting because my diet, I think, is 60% fat, 20% protein, and 20% carbs.
Now that starts to smell, especially if you limit the type of foods you eat, more like paleo.
That is exactly what it is.
Yeah, so that's what it smells a lot more like. And so then, after Zone, the paleo trend came through our community, and I was like, I want to try paleo. And so I switched over to paleo, which the paleo purists are going to be like, if they looked at my foods, it's probably not 100% paleo because, corn tacos, unless our cavemen sisters and brothers were able to hunt it, probably don't fall into that category.
Right.
So I did quote paleo for a while where, the food intake was very heavily biased towards fat and modestly biased towards protein because protein and fat tend to come hand in hand, and then very minimally biased towards carbohydrates. And the carbohydrates that were intaken were typically through fruits and, vegetables and sweet potato fries, so that was for a while. And then recently, the new trend that I'm trying out is what we call macro counting. And so there's a new wave of nutrition enthusiasts that like to fall into the category of if it fits your macros, which means you have a caloric bank every day of, whatever you calculate it out to be. There's different calculators out there you can use, but let's just say mine was 2,500 calories a day. Then what would happen is that would be partitioned out into grams of protein, grams of carbs, and grams of fat. And based on how you manipulated those grams and percentages, as long as you can fit it into your daily bank, meaning as long as at the end of the day, everything goes in as 25, out as 25 with these measurements in place, you can eat donuts.
Wow.
And cheeseburgers and ice cream and Snickers bars, right? That might not be your healthiest option.
Sure.
But that's the whole premise behind if it fits your macros is if it fits, you can eat it.
That's very surprising because I think, at least as far as the research I've done, I started out actually on slow carb from the 4-Hour Body and then kind of moved slowly into paleo because I wasn't getting the results I wanted. It seems that a lot of the success that people attribute to paleo comes from this switch away from high glycemic index foods, lowering the insulin load and stuff like that. Yep. So I'm surprised to hear that donuts fit into a diet that's kind of post-paleo.
Right. Well, I am going to be the first to say that when I switched over to if it fits your macros, it sounds very, it's like the shiny new red ball in the playground that everybody wants to play with, right? So it's very appealing and it's very attractive. But I will say there's a very strong case to be made for nutrient timing where if I decide to eat a giant bowl of pasta in the middle of my day, I better be ready to suffer the consequences about an hour later because I'm ready to hit the hay and take a nap.
Absolutely.
And so even though I do play around with my daily caloric block, I am very conscientious of when I insert what. And that's largely because it doesn't matter what the system is, your body chemistry is your body chemistry. If I'm going to eat carbs, I'm going to eat my densest amount of carbs, whether it's high glycemic, low glycemic, either before, during, or after my training.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Timing really makes a difference. I mean, one of the things I like that Tim Ferriss advocates is if you have to eat carbs, if you find yourself in a situation where that's what's available, do some quick squats, activate some of the larger muscles and see if you can burn off some of that glycogen to then replenish your muscles with the impending sugar rush.
Oh, interesting. I would even take that a step further and say by eliciting more of a physiological response from the body, your body's also more prepared to take in the carbs and just shuttle it over to your muscles as well.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the premise behind it. And there's a funny story where someone kind of saw his feet from under the bathroom stall and he ordered his dish and then ran into the restaurant stall and kind of did 20 squats or something like that.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's kind of a nut job a little bit, but
that's not weird at all.
Not at all. Not at all. Diane, what about supplementation? I know with the volume of work that you're doing in Ollie lifting, I imagine recovery supplementation, stuff like that is probably very important.
It is. And there's a case to be made from being able to recover well, also from eating proper foods. But, that requires people to be on top of the type of nutrients and the dosing of nutrients on a daily basis. And if anybody has any semblance of a extremely crazy schedule, they know how difficult it is to sometimes even get food in the mouth. So supplements kind of come into play, for weightlifters in the sense that we play around with things like caffeine. We play around with supplements like creatine. We might take some BCAAs or glutamine to aid in recovery. And there's definitely, I'm not shy to say it, there are pre-workouts that we'll take to upregulate the body and prepare us for the stimulus that's going to come in during our session as well.
Yeah.
Fish oils are, I think, pretty universally accepted at this point that we also engage in to help manage and counterbalance, the inflammation that does occur in our systems.
Yeah, one of my favorites actually that I advocate to anyone, especially a CrossFitter, comes out of cycling, believe it or not, which is beta-alanine.
Oh, yes. Okay.
I try to work out 6 days a week.
The feels. It gives you the feels everywhere.
I don't get that anymore. I don't get the tingles. But what I do get is if I forget to take it, I'm sore like I was the first few months of doing CrossFit the next day.
Interesting. Now, do you take it before? Do you take it post?
I take it before. I usually forget post. I downcycle the dosages a little bit. So I'm taking 4 capsules out of a recommended 6 before every workout alongside creatine and tons of water. But yeah, I don't actually get the tingles anymore. I certainly can tell when I haven't taken it, and it offsets the soreness quite a bit.
Interesting. I'm familiar with beta-alanine because I call it the feels. And anytime a supplement, a pre-workout especially that I take that has beta-alanine, which seems to be a pretty popular ingredient these days, it just gives you the flush. Yeah. And I haven't researched much of the science behind it to see what the idea is. But basically, the premise is that beta-alanine increases vascular function, right? So your capillaries expand. I imagine because you're able to increase circulation and blood flow, you're probably also able to supply your body with more nutrients to aid in exercise,
Correct.
Is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and it lessens the effects of anaerobic exercise, thereby kind of stymieing lactic acid.
Right, exactly. So the lactic acid doesn't end up staying in the muscle tissue quite as strongly.
As I understand it, yeah. There's that one, and then there's L-arginine, which I don't take anymore, but is also supposedly really fantastic for recovery.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That piece I'm definitely not quite as familiar with, but the beta-alanine I am, just because of the effects that it gives the body initially.
Oh, yeah. I certainly had those effects when I took nitric oxide or NOx. You get this kind of tingling all over.
Yes.
But I think a lot of that stuff is now banned at the competitive level.
Probably. They're constantly altering the banned substance list, especially as supplement companies come up with more creative ways to help athletes enhance their performance.
Of course. Diane, I have a question less about working out, but more about, I'm curious what the main sources of your success are, or what you would say the main sources of your success are, both as an athlete and as a trainer.
My successes, thank you for putting my athletic accomplishments in there as a success. Not many would quite term that. I am, not by any means a talented athlete. I happen to have good range of motion. I happen to be very passionate about what I do. And so that has brought me to a certain level. But, I am constantly humbled every single day by the CrossFit athletes, the weightlifting athletes that I watch, these young girls coming up the pipeline where I'm like, man, that's what you call talent.
Mm-hmm.
What I do is just called hard work.
It's funny you say that. We had an episode with a 2-time world champion Thai kickboxer, and she said the exact same thing. The episode was actually titled "Why Hard Work Beats Talent."
Oh yeah, well, I don't think I took mine that far. But, so thank you. Like I said, I consider what I do just passion, labor, love, hard work. And so I was able to bring my own athletic accomplishments to the current level. But on a grand scale of things, it's just, that's all it is. And it's an accomplishment for me that I'm very proud of, especially understanding my potential and where I've been. So I'm super proud of how far I've taken myself. Now, in terms of my professional successes, I can't attribute that to just me alone. Because yes, I put in the hard work. Yes, I'm dedicated. Yes, I love what I do. But it's through the collaboration with the people around me It's through the community that I service and that I work with and that I teach that I am where I am today. And the biggest contributor to all of that success, and I say it over and over again, is, the daily conversations I get to have with, great thinkers like Kelly, Carl Paoli, Nate Helming, Roop Ciota, all these people that are around me. Currently, my coach, my weightlifting coach, Coach Wu out of Singapore, like all these different coaches that I get to collaborate and that I get to have conversations with, create my thinking, help evolve my thinking, and are able to continue to push me forward so I can solve the problems that I'm seeing on a daily basis and come up with solutions for the athletes that I coach and teach, right? So conversation is the driver, I would say, of my success.
Amazing. It sounds like also humility is a big aspect of it as well.
You got to keep your ego in check, because if your ego is not in check, there are so many people willing to check it for you.
Oh, that is so true, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it keeps you level-headed and allows you to see. Nothing is more blinding than a person's ego.
That is so true. That is so true. I never really thought of it that way. Diane, one question that I really like to ask is, if you could prescribe one thing that the general population should do every day, one ritual or routine, what would it be?
One ritual routine. Kelly kind of took it from me, I know. I would say just the squat. He's absolutely right. He hit the nail on the head. If there's something somebody should be doing on a daily basis, it's learning how to sit down on the floor and stand back up again, because that's your independence. If you can't do that, then suddenly you are going to be at the mercy and at the hands of somebody else.
Right. Did you see that there was a viral video in the Moscow metro where you can now, in some stations, pay for your metro ticket with squats?
Yes. Brilliant. I think that is brilliant. I think that is absolutely brilliant, and we're seeing more of those things. I think Japan has something installed like that where you can buy your ticket through movement, and I'm like, dude, I don't know why all the countries haven't adopted something like that. Because,
amazing.
Another thing when I was going through Latin America that I thought was super cool is the city will block off streets now. They will say, okay, every Sunday from this hour to this hour, these streets are completely sectioned off. No vehicles, no bikes, no nothing. It's for people to walk, to run, to exercise. And so I thought when I saw that, I was like, wow, that's really cool. Imagine if San Francisco every Sunday decided to have a health and wellness for the public, and they blocked off, let's say, Market Street from start to finish, and just let people exercise and come together as a community, in the middle of the road. I thought that was a really cool idea.
Totally cool. Reminds me also actually of Moscow, where they have Gorky Park, which is sectioned off, and they have CrossFit there and free yoga, and kind of really, really cool for a culture that's not historically big on kind of movement besides at the high level gymnast. I thought it was super cool when I was in Moscow to see that.
Yeah, I am all for that. So yes, I've seen that video of the squat to buy your train ticket, and I thought that was really neat.
Super cool. So Diane, last question. What are you working on right now? Where can people get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing, or maybe take a class with you?
So I've got a few projects on the horizon. I'm starting to talk to some coaches and boxes out in the Asian market, Europe Asian market, where I want to be able to bring the FuBarbell philosophy out to the other half of the world that's now starting to gain some traction. So I will be looking at doing some seminars overseas on that half of the world in the next year. Projects in terms of products that are coming out on the horizon. I'm looking at putting out some more web-based products with the company, my production company that I work with, Cody App, where we provide programming and other video tutorial resources for athletes to be able to bring up their strength or bring up their weightlifting. Also looking at collaborating with another coach that I'm working out with in Melbourne, Australia. I'm putting out some free publications for people just to be able to reference some basic information on movement. I'm talking to this coach. His name is Lester Ho. He's out of Melbourne, Australia, where we want to help coaches gain a deeper understanding of the human body, because not all bodies are created equal. The systems might work the same, but there are things that, such as levers, that we should take into account when teaching athletes how to enter and exit out of different positions that will have direct impact on their movement. We're looking at putting out also a book, hopefully in the next year or so, that's also going to help coaches take a look at weightlifting through a different lens. So we've got quite a few things kind of simmering, a lot of plates spinning up in the air at this point.
Yeah.
If people, it's a lot, trust me. So, which is why, again, thank you for waiting on this podcast with me for the last month. I really appreciate that.
Well, you were very worth the wait.
Oh, thank you so much. You're so kind. But if people want to follow what I'm doing, please come check me out on Facebook. You can find FuBarbell on Facebook to be able to follow the daily weightlifting musings of what I do. You can also follow me on Instagram under Diane Fu. You can follow me on Twitter under Diane Fu. And so those currently are my three main channels. Mm-hmm. If you want to support FuBarbell, which I love all the support that we can get from the community, come check out FuBarbell.com and either check out where I'm going to be in terms of seminars under events, or simply, pick up some gear, pick up a t-shirt, and just check out my gear that we have to offer. So those are all the different avenues that you'll be able to see me.
Awesome. And we will link to all of those in the show notes. Just to clarify, FuBarbell is also doing stuff at SF CrossFit, but also traveling around the world and doing seminars, correct?
Yeah. So FuBarbell is a platform. So we have FuBarbell Club, which athletes that come through San Francisco, please come hang out with us. We'd love to meet as many faces as we can. We operate inside San Francisco CrossFit as a club. Our hours of operation are Monday through Thursday, 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., and Saturdays from 12:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. And so if athletes do want to come check us out, shoot me an email or just show up a little bit early, maybe a half hour early to get yourself in the door. And, we welcome athletes of all backgrounds.
Awesome. I will be visiting in June, and I will definitely make it to SF CrossFit. It's a for sure thing.
I want you to email me directly, Jonathan. We're going to hang out one-on-one.
Awesome. I would love to do that. And also, by the way, we need to chat. I just released the book. And also, as I mentioned, I do online courses. So we need to chat and kind of catch up offline about that as well, because I'd love to kind of share some best practices.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if you want to have this be part of the podcast, but I want to learn more about your accelerated learning, because that's something that I am constantly seeking out, as well as more information on how to push the limits of human performance. Right now, the book that I'm reading, the current one is Becoming Superman, right? The Rise of Superman, and just learning how to tap into the limits of that altered awareness that people get when they're in the zone, and learning how to harness that on a regular basis without that level of stimulation being present. And so those are all things that if you have to share, I want to learn more from you as well.
I'd be more than happy to share. So Diane, for today, I think I've taken enough of your time, although I think we could talk for another 2 hours happily. But thank you so much for being so generous.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's keep in touch and have a great day, Diane.
Thank you, Jonathan. You too.
Bye-bye. All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. By the way, before you get back to rocking your day and applying some of the new knowledge you've picked up in the last half hour or so, please do us a big favor and head over to iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you discovered this episode and leave us a review. Reviews are a really important aspect of making the show a success, and besides helping us create more great content for you, they really, really brighten our day. That's all for now. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.